Hi, my name's Ian Wright, and this podcast is just a little introduction into sports and osteopathy, which is what I practice and have been practicing for a long time, over 25 years. And actually over that time, I'm probably much more known in my field for being a teacher of pediatrics, which I've been teaching for a very long time. But I have, over the last 25 years, treated quite a lot of elite sports people in a variety of genres like soccer, rugby, athletics, hurlers, jockeys, and top kind of yoga teachers. Now, all these sports have very particular, different issues, and I could do a podcast about each particular sport and what particular issues come up and how to prevent them. So I'm just giving you a little kind of intro. But there is a unifying theme throughout dealing with all sports people, especially people who are at the top end of it. You know, athletes are finely tuned, and subtle imbalances can cause great difficulties. So in all of these different fields, you're looking at structural alignment, and it's so important. And I'm just going to go into that a little bit because I think it's very important to kind of mention. I'll give you an example. Treating, say, a 100-meter runner or some sort of athlete runner, and I remember doing this quite a lot of times in the past. If there is a subtle misalignment in the spine, for example, the pelvis has a slight twist in it, it's so subtle that you can barely see it. That imbalance left and right through the spine, even if there is a kind of curve of the spine, a scoliosis or not, these things are so subtle, can create subtle imbalances in the tension of the muscle groups, the tendons, and also the ligaments. And these subtle imbalances, if you're at prime level and pushing it hard, can lead to strains and put much more strain on certain areas. Certain areas are more prone to wear and tear, etc., etc. It's like, it's like basically a car with its tracking slightly out. The tire wears down. It's really as simple as that. This is real biomechanical balance. And so we as osteopaths look at the body as a whole. And for example, if you're looking at, say, a tennis player who has tennis elbow or golfing elbow, whatever, when we're looking at them, we're looking at the structure of the whole shoulder girdle, the scapula, all of the joints of the shoulder, the upper ribs, the spine, how all of these functional and interconnected units, each part of them are vital and they interconnect. And if one part of this functional unit is not quite aligned or functioning correctly, it puts strain on other areas. So usually, for example, in tennis and golfer's elbow, the problem is normally in the shoulder girdle, but actually the problem could be through the hip and pelvis, through the attachments of, say, latissimus dorsi. The whole thing is interconnected and works as this biomechanical structural unit, which all is interconnected. And it's terribly important to look at it like that, especially at this top end level when the body is being pushed very, very hard. For example, if there are people who have slight structural or biomechanical imbalances in their musculoskeletal system, and if they're not overly using them, it's not going to cause a problem too much. But if you're pushing it right hard, you're going to be prone to it. For example, in hurlers or soccer players, very much so. If you've got imbalances in the pelvis, it can make you more prone to chronic hamstring tendinitises, which are very difficult. It's interesting because, as I spend my time a lot with children, but I do treat these very, very difficult cases in high-level sports people of situations like hamstring injuries that just aren't getting better. They're just not healing correctly, and every time they run again, it goes out. And actually, you have to get the structural alignment of the pelvis correct, and if you don't, it's impossible for them to heal correctly, no matter how much you rub it, work it, and using different genres. So, it's funny. I always, when I'm treating sports people, they tend to come to me as the very last resort because they've done everything else and they're stuck. And that's very much my normal patient, funnily enough. Just a couple of other things I want to talk about with regards to sports. Feet. I personally love lecturing about feet because they're underestimated and they're so important. The functional mechanics of the feet are vital because that's how we connect to the earth, and that's how we move, and that's how we spring. And the function of the longitudinal and the lateral arches in the feet is vital, and it can throw everything else out if it's not there. And the feet are held together by these incredibly strong ligaments, which are in a very fine balance. And if that balance in the ligamentous articular wholeness, because actually all these ligaments are interconnected, actually they're all separately named, but they all have connective tissue connections, and they work as a functional unit. And we do this wonderful techniques called balanced ligamentous techniques, where we're almost restoring the factory settings to the ligaments, reminding them of their normal, so they can find their balance. And it's wonderful in realigning complex feet mechanic problems. But feet are vital, and I really quite enjoy teaching and treating feet. Another thing I want to talk about in terms of when you're looking at top-level sports people is I'm very interested in maximizing oxygenation, lung function. So looking at the mechanics of the diaphragm, the ribs, the intercostal muscles, so you have this full lung freedom and function, so that can maximize your oxygenation, which is highly important when you're working very, very hard and for fitness, to maximize fitness. So when I'm working with sports people, I always like to look at those kinds of things. Just one final point on stretching, which I think is really important. I run every morning, and stretching for me is the most important part almost of it. And most sports people, I mean, it's getting better, but most sports people just still don't warm up correctly, warm down correctly, and most importantly, don't stretch correctly. The most important thing in stretch for me is to maintain the stretch and use your breath when you're stretching. So, for example, if you're stretching out your hamstrings, it's very important to hold the stretch for over 20-25 seconds, because after about 20 seconds, in my view, you start to not to engage the tendon so much, but actually you start to engage the fascial connective tissue, which surrounds every muscle group, is surrounded by this web of fascia connective tissue, the perimysium. And this is often the cause of problems when there are complex, non-healing or slow healing tendon muscular difficulties. It's actually more to do with the fascial sheaths of the muscles. And the stretch, when you hold a stretch, it starts to engage only after 20 seconds. It's a different stretch, and it's interesting if you hold it for 20 seconds and you breathe correctly, meaning you take a slow breath in, and on your out breath you increase the stretch very slowly, breathe out and take on the stretch a little bit more. Very, very important to do it very slowly. And so over about 20 seconds, you suddenly find, if you use your breath correctly, that actually, so the breathing is actually increasing the stretch, that suddenly there's this big shift in it actually moves on. It's like everything gives way, and it has this other, and you think, how on earth did I stretch that much further? So it's very important to do that, to stretching. I mean, gosh, stretching for me is the most important part of doing sports and exercise, and it's coming in more and more. But there we go. That's just a brief introduction to alignment, to maximizing function as a sports person, and what we do to help that. Thank you.